everybody. I want to welcome you to Inside the Magic Circle. Today I'm talking to the illustrious witch and author of the book Psychic Witch, Mat Auryn, and he is going to share with us his journey and his experiences in life. And I'm super excited to talk to him because he is from where I'm from, so we get to talk about Massachusetts and the Northeast a little bit, and we get to talk about magic and witchcraft. And what's interesting, Matt, is I was reading through your book just recently, and it actually bears a striking resemblance to my book, and we'll talk about that, another book of mine. So anyway, let's introduce you. Matt, thank you. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So I just read this just in the last few days, and I can tell that we've sort of drunk from some of the same wells as we can start to look. There's a number of places where the book's really like there's like marked similarities, like discussion of brainwave states, and your circle casting. Some of the diagrams look like very similar to my book, the Book of Magic Power. But they're clearly not the same book, and I go into some areas that you don't go into, and you go into a number of areas I don't go into. So they're not like really, the same book at all, but it's funny that the number of places that they sort of like, I can't really disagree with anything in your book because it shares so many qualities with my own book.
I got to get that book. I have the new Hermetics, but I'm gonna have to check out your book now.
This is the first book that I self-published, and it actually was under contract with Wiser, and the book that came out before it did so poorly that they gave me back the rights to this and didn't publish it. And I was like, oh, I guess I'll self-publish it. And it's actually my most successful book. But so anyway, so sorry, Wiser, you made the wrong choice many times with my career. So Matt, let's begin with at the beginning with you. I like to sort of get a sense of where people are coming from. In your book, you mentioned that you grew up in a fairly religious home. So what was the religion that was being practiced in your home?
So it's Christianity, but it was a church branch called Assembly of God, which is like the two most, in my opinion, extreme American sects of Christianity. It's Pentecostal and evangelical, sort of like had a baby. And I was living with my grandparents at the time, and that's what my step-grandmother was into. So that's what we were raised in. And it's very, very conservative, and it's very much like everything is a spiritual battle. Like it's very war focused, like you see in a lot of evangelical type stuff. But there's also that Pentecostal element to it. So there was a lot of interesting sort of ecstatic things going on during all of it.
I was going to ask, are there any positive spiritual things that came out of that the experience of growing up in that?
I mean, I don't know. Like, I think a lot of it helped kind of push me away from Christianity, which I see as helpful.
Good for you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then also, being sort of a sensitive child, like I could, tell when energy was like lashing around, and that's what it felt like. It was very different than, say, working with a tradition where everything feels a lot more controlled and contained. But there is sort of a similarity just in the sense of energy, but it's like lashing around. It's chaotic. People are like falling to the ground, being slayed by the spirit, like all kinds of, wild, and way more wild than anything I've experienced in any witchcraft tradition.
And how much of that do you think is just sort of, the culture of it and play acting, and how much of it is a real spiritual experience that they're having?
I'm not sure, and I think there is an intersection between those two things, which is something I sort of talk about in my book in regards to psychic ability and magic. I think part of it is that they have created a container within the church to essentially give themselves permission, so they have permission to have these experiences, and they essentially are expecting it as well. It's taught as a reality, and I think that in itself is very powerful.
So those sorts of Christian organizations are very insular. You said that you asked a lot of questions, and that was kind of what drew you away from it. At what point did you realize that you were on a completely different wavelength than what they were doing?
You know, I was very, very young. You know, I've always been the person who asks questions to the annoyance of like everyone around me. Um, you know, I just remember like little things like things that weren't even biblical as my first questions. So at the time, I remember Timothy McVeigh was all over the news
Sure.
for the Oklahoma bombings. And I remember, you know, being told in church that like, oh, in prison, he, you know, repented and accepted God, so he's going to heaven, you know. But then that kind of contradicted what I was being told, that like Gandhi was going to hell. So, you know, right away I have like kind of a, wait, what's going on? And then I had like even more complex questions as it progressed, just because we went to church maybe like 4 or 5 times a week,
Hmm.
you know, for different things. So like there's Sunday, there's Super Saturday, which was like the kids, there's Wednesday Bible study, stuff like that. And I remember during Bible study, we were reading the New Testament, and I must have been like 7 or 8 or something. And they're tracing the genealogy from King David to Jesus Christ to show that he fulfills prophecy.
Right.
But they traced it to Mary, or they traced it to Joseph.
Right.
So, you know, that caused confusion, and they didn't like that question of like, isn't it a virgin birth though? You know, so
Right.
how does he fulfill this prophecy? Um,
That always was a sticky one for me too.
yeah.
So so you're kind of an expert on these on the Bible then, if you've been forced to study it a lot.
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. You know, I was forced to read it a lot. But I think expert is a big word. You know, I don't read Hebrew, I don't read Greek, you know, I don't do what's the word? Hermeneutics?
Hermeneutics.
Hermeneutics, that's it. Yeah, like, you know, I haven't had any sort of critical reading of it in the context of anything outside of what the church was telling me things were. But
So
I'm
you
versed in it.
you know a lot of the verses, or at least the ones they wanted you to look at, right? I mean,
Right.
it's a pick and choose kind of thing with most churches. Um,
Mm.
so you also mentioned that your dad is a Harley Davidson biker. What,
Yes.
how does that fit into the whole puzzle?
Um, well, you know, my parents had a very rough life, which is why I was living with my grandparents. I was a foster care kid.
Mm.
My dad was I don't want to go too much into like my dad and his dirty laundry, but you know, he was hardcore up until about high school when he kind of got his shit together. Um, and like he still loves Harley Davidson, like he's not running with like biker gangs or anything anymore, but yeah,
But he must have been an okay guy, because children and animals always liked him, you mentioned.
yes. Yes. So despite all of my dad's difficulties in life, he's always been one of the biggest hearted people I've ever met. He's also the most psychic person I've ever met. You know, I, I, like, I don't know. I feel weird saying that because I know some of my teachers would be like, really, even more than me.
The most natural psychic, or psychic that's not a part of the magical community, perhaps that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and he so like when he got his shit together, it was a very like finding Jesus kind of thing,
Hmm.
like it is for a lot of people, but he didn't go overboard with it. Um,
Did he
but
join your grandparents' church?
no, so that's my mother's side.
Mm.
Um, and he got his act together after my grandfather had passed.
Hmm.
Um, but he it's sort of like this weird relationship he has with it, with his psychic ability, where it's sort of like he doesn't want to acknowledge it even when it's happening. So like, you know, he'll just be like, oh, I had a dream that, like, you know, the tire went flat. And then like later driving that day, the tire goes flat. You know, or we grew up in high school during my whole high school life with him when he got his stuff together and I was living with him again. We lived in a really haunted is the word I would use. I don't know if I would still have that opinion going back. I might have more of a nuanced understanding of what was going on. But the house before we got it was essentially a crack house, for lack of a better word, that was in my grandmother's name. So my dad, you know, bought it to save her from like legal trouble and repair it. But there was a lot of really weird activity going on, a lot of chaotic, and I would even use the word dark, and I don't tend to use those words. And my dad would always be like, oh, no, 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 you know, there's nothing going on, blah, 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 blah. But if he thought he was alone, like you could tell it was different because he would like knock before he went into the garage that was empty and be like, oh, I'm coming in, you know, stuff of that nature. And it wasn't until I was much older that, you know, we started talking a little bit more about his psychic ability. He still is conflicted because he's been told that like these things are not of God. You know, while some churches are very big on the idea of the Holy Spirit and prophecy and stuff of that nature, I guess whatever church he's involved with is not supportive of that kind of a thing.
So at what point did you realize that you were a witch?
I don't know. I know when I decided I wanted to be a witch, you know, which is when I was a little kid and I saw the movie The Craft, which is, you know, funny because that was the last recent fad before this current one of witches. But I had snuck up late at night when I was living with my grandparents, and I was watching TV, you know, because I was allowed to like watch whatever I want if they didn't know. And I saw The Craft on television. And for me, that was sort of a empowering, and I liken it to like almost like a religious epiphany, because even though it's fictional and it's, you know, kind of really campy by today's standards, just seeing witchcraft and magic portrayed as something that everyday people could engage in was really powerful for me. So this was when I was in elementary school. So I went on a mission to find information. And so I went to my school library and I started kind of trying to find any book I could get on witches, which didn't turn up much results in an elementary school library. You know, you get like Roald Dahl's The Witches and like lots of, you know, kid fiction. But they had a whole Time Life series that you couldn't check out. And one of those was on witchcraft. And so it was all like folklore and mythology and legend. And then in the very back, it had modern witchcraft. And it had what you would expect. It had Aleister Crowley, it had Anton LaVey, but then it had Maxine Sanders. And that picture of her on the hill and then the initiates around her. And it had the word Wicca. So I was like armed with a term, and they were just integrating computer labs into the school. So I went on Netscape Navigator and I looked up Wicca and I found that there were authors writing about these things. And long story short, I went on a mission and after many failed attempts, finally got my hands on Silver Ravenwolf and Scott Cunningham and, you know, books that I could digest. And it's sort of been a long thirst since then.
And you grew up in New England. Was it in Massachusetts or was it somewhere else?
So I didn't grow up in New England.
Oh,
I grew
okay.
up in California. I lived in New England for about like 6 or 7 years due to a relationship. And at that time is when, you know, I got involved with the Temple of Witchcraft and the Cabots and Salem and all of that. And then it's right before the plague really became a big thing. I moved to California and I'm glad I did because my relationship was ending and I was having dreams of like, get out, get out, get out. And I didn't quite understand why. But now in retrospect, it's like, oh yeah, I would be stuck in a situation that would not have been super pleasant.
So you you worked at a lot of, or at least one shop in Salem doing psychic readings. You mentioned in the book. At what point did you go from being a student of witchcraft with these various teachers? Amongst them are Lori Cabot and Christopher Penzak. Are there others as well that were your teachers?
There were, and there still are. You know, I am constantly wanting to learn. Like I said, that thirst has never ended. So the tradition that I am the most invested in is Sacred Fires, which is Devon Hunter, which is sort of downline of the fairy tradition.
At what point did you start doing psychic readings?
So I started doing psychic readings fairly early on. So I was working at a place and we all got laid off. And during this period of being laid off, they were rebuilding the whole building. Like there was a lot of like structural construction going on. And I was like, I need money, you know? And so, you know, my friend Christopher was like, oh, hey, like in Enchanted, like, you know, I know they need readers. I know you do this, you know, I can put in a good word for you. So I got, you know, everything set up to read there. And then the day before I was about to start beginning that job, I got an email from my employer, my previous employer, saying like, oh, you know, we're coming back to work that exact day. You know, so I was sort of at a crossroads of like, well, what do I do? Like, you know, I much rather be doing this thing that like feeds my spirit versus this job that destroys my soul. So I took a leap of faith and I decided to do the tarot reading and, you know, figure out how I can make that sustainable. And funny enough, like a month later, I emailed a coworker to be like, oh, what's going on with work? What's, you know, the gossip, what's going on? And she was like, oh, actually, like the business went under. Like everyone has been like fired. It doesn't exist anymore. So it's like one of those weird things where I just happened to make the right choice, even though it didn't seem like the logical choice at that time.
Don't you think it's logical to follow your heart though, pretty much all the time? Like if you, even if
I mean,
even if
I
the
do think
reverse
I'm a
had happened, it still might have been the right move, right?
right. I'm a Pisces, so you know, I'm totally on board with that. My partner at the time did not think it was a good decision.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can imagine that. So, so what kind of readings do you still do readings at this point, or are you sort of?
I don't. And that's part of why I wrote the book.
Mhm.
My I, I don't know how to say this in a way that doesn't sound like I'm a big asshole, but my the demand for readings got so high that like I kept like trying to jack up my price to try to like slow it down, and it just wasn't happening, and it was eating into writing projects, including the book that I was working on. So you know, it kind of took you know, my experience as being a psychic, my training, and as well as like the workshops I was teaching and stuff, and I kind of like put it together and am like, here, you do it. So I don't do readings anymore, just because they are so time consuming.
Yeah.
You know, I much rather at this point like help people do their own readings.
So, what kind of readings were you doing? Were you just, is it just straight psychic readings, or were you doing tarot readings, or what was your
So
modality?
all of it. So it started out as just tarot readings, right? And very, you know, straightforward, you know, using traditional meanings and associations. And then slowly that shifted over time and it became more of a prop for the client. And more psychic. You know, there were a lot of readings where, you know, I didn't use the cards at all. But even like Lori Cabot, who read in the shop, right? So she does tarot readings. She doesn't read the card. Like, I mean, she kind of reads the cards, but
Mhm.
she's just straight up psychic reading. It's more of like to give someone something to look at to see that she's doing something, if
Sure.
that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've worked as a reader too, so I know. And I also generally don't do readings anymore either,
Yeah.
except occasionally. If someone asks me, I'll do it, but I don't offer that service publicly for not really the same reason. For me, it's more because it's sort of it's a drain on my, mental resources over time. So
Mhm.
more than time based, but
Mm.
anyway, um, so you decided to write this book to sort of in a way free yourself from this, right? It was you're offering a
Part of it, yes.
so what I'm curious about, in the book, you have a very energy based focus in it. You here and there you kind of mention spirits and gods and so forth, but it's pretty, the contents of the book don't have any of that in there. What part do you sort of working with spirits and so forth, other than the higher self? You mentioned that frequently, but other than that, it's all just basically energies. And even you have a section on the planets, and even there you don't really mention any beings associated with them or the elements. Like it's just the energy. So where do beings, spirits, ancestors, all that stuff play a part in your own personal journey?
In my own personal journey, they've played a major part. And they're sort of what brought me back to witchcraft, experiences that I was having. Because, like I said, at a very young age, I was super into Wicca, like Wicca with a lower case W,
Hmm.
books. And then in high school, I went through my whole like Anton LaVey, atheism, goth phase. And then after high school, I felt like I was missing something. So I got into other spiritual modalities and paths that were uh, energy based. Um, and then I started having spontaneous astral projection. And I thought I was dying the first couple times that it occurred. It was scary. And I wanted to learn like how I can try to control that, so that it's not something that is spontaneous or is out of my control. So I started looking into other books on astral projection, and that got me into books on like shamanistic techniques. And that got me into Christopher's Shamanic Temple of Witchcraft. And there was a lot of information in that book that I had either experienced or was being told from spirit contacts from my out of body experiences. So this was when I was when I first arrived to New England, and I told my partner about it. I was like, oh my God, this is like exactly, what X, Y, and Z was telling me, or this was my experience. And my partner was like, oh, Christopher Penczak lives like right around the corner. He has like a temple, like not corner, but in Massachusetts and New England, everything sort of around the corner. So I ended up going to an open house of theirs, falling in love with Christopher as a person, and then getting to know his work and falling in love with his work. And yeah, I mean, for me, spirit work is important. Um, but I still think that there were a lot of times on my path that I was not good with discernment. So I'm very big, and that's why I'm totally void of a lot of the spirit stuff, other than a simple exercise that involves guides, and that's essentially it, because I believe that connecting with your inner spirit is more important before you jump off into other spirits. And I mean that in the sense of also the middle self. So like learning how your mind works, and learning, what is more of like subconscious reception, like kind of like a Jungian, like what is your symbol system, and then like what is based on like fears or projection, stuff of that nature. Getting deeper into meditation so that you can understand when you're being receptive and when you're kind of trying to force meaning or an experience. So that's why I wanted to start the book as like void of all of those things, because I also believe that psychic ability and magical ability is something that everyone can engage in, and I state that a billion times in my book. And if I believe that's true, I believe that You don't necessarily need to incorporate spirits or deities of a certain path into that work.
So you think that a person could operate your book and have no spirit contact whatsoever, and that would be fine. I mean, obviously you're having spirit contact because you're connecting with the spiritual
Right.
realm, but you don't
Entities.
entities. What about gods and goddesses? I mean, you mentioned Hecate and Janus in the book,
Mhm.
but only in passing, and
Mhm.
and no real reference to deity at all, other than that.
Yeah. Well, I think like the next closest would be when I'm discussing Baphomet, and I think that kind of ties into, perhaps it's more of like my theosophical influence in my life, or it's more, Western mystery tradition. I do believe that all paths eventually do lead to the same thing.
Hmm?
And I'm a very big proponent of believing that when you do start opening these psychic faculties and learning how to work energy, you are going to come across deities and spirits. How you decide to relate to them and how you decide to incorporate them and how you view them, I'm not here to tell you that. I rather have people sort of learn their own discernment and figure out what their path is.
I completely 100% agree with that, but um, one of the reasons I like to have these interviews is that I want to know what you think, not that you want to let people think what they want. I'm curious about your personal beliefs and your personal path as it reflects your journey in your life. So, um, what to you, what are the gods?
That is a very, very difficult question.
It is.
I believe what defines a deity for me um, is very similar to so so in my book I have the reality map, right, of the seven dimensional reality.
Mhm.
So I believe that humans and deities are sort of opposites. So I believe that what defines a deity is that they exist on all seven planes simultaneously, but it's more um, of a higher reaching down, whereas humans, our awareness is more on this lower plane. And I think like Kabbalistically, you're going to have different layers of what deity is, up to, Kether, up to like the Ains, I'm deeply influenced by the Chaldean oracles at the moment,
Mhm.
which also ties into sort of my more universalism of belief. Um, so I believe that, like, for example, let's use Jupiter as an example. So
Sure.
I believe that like what makes Jupiter Jupiter and what makes Jupiter a deity is that there's Jupiter most high, right? So there's Jupiter that is sort of this cosmic creator or reflection of the true creator energy, right? So I would see that as divine level. I also believe that there's Jupiter that is more of a psychic experience. That's more of a individual entity that you can interact with. I believe that on another level, Jupiter is a astral energy. So it's that energy that we're tapping into when we are working with Jupiterian energy on a planetary level. I believe that there's an internal Jupiter. I believe that there's an emotional Jupiter. I believe there's a physical manifestation of Jupiter. Whether that's like lightning strike or whatever. I for me, deity is something that transcends all of the levels, but is simultaneously aware of all of that, if that makes sense.
I think
Um,
that's a pretty good answer to the question. You um you begin your book with imagination, which is something. It's one of the things that I liked about your book, and that I felt a kindred spirit, because I talk about the imagination a lot and how important it is and how really essential it is to magic and to ultimately to enjoying life. Um, but where does imagination fit within what you just described, that sort of hierarchy of being?
Okay. So imagination can fit into kind of sort of the more like I was saying, the internal.
Mhm.
So, I believe that, I do agree with Carl Jung, both in his early career and his later career, when he kind of shifts his idea of what an archetype is. So I do believe that there is, an internal energy. And I think it takes a lot of imagination to tap into that, to be like, like, how am I Zeus? What is the Zeus within me? I believe that there is the thought form Zeus, and or thought forms of Zeus. And I believe that that ties into sort of more of that, like that psychic independent entity,
Mhm.
that has an individual consciousness as opposed to like a higher up universal sort of consciousness. Does
And
that
does your imaginative Zeus or Jupiter, I'm sorry, I'm conflating things. Does that automatically connect with the other levels of it, or is it separate?
so I do believe that they're all paths to the same thing. So even like embodying Jupiter as an energy, I feel is going to put you into alignment with Jupiter. And what I mean by that is, um, you know, energies that start to become more planetary, so energies of, like religious order and authority and being jovial, qualities that are Zeus, is going to bring you into alignment with, how could I put it? So it's sort of like it's going to help you to approach the outer um the outer barrier, so to speak, of what is Jupiter. And whether you choose to enter that or not, I think is up to the individual again. These are things that are sort of hard to define. I mean, what is deity is
I
like.
guess that's my job, is to ask people hard things to divine. Um, but your imaginative Jupiter
Mhm,
that's inside of you,
mhm.
can you separate that from the bigger Jupiter? Or I mean, ultimately it has to be connected, and I mean, it seems like if there's a path, the path is there no matter what. So
Right.
I think, because
Um,
the reason I'm asking this weird question is because
mhm.
there's sort of like these factions within the magical community they want to sort of compartmentalize things. I'm just trying to see where your head is at on along those lines.
Yeah, so I'm very big on, like, obviously the Hermetic idea of, as above, so below, as within, so without. I believe that inner pathways lead outward as well. And you see that in a lot of shamanistic things, where you go to the underworld to reach the upper world, right? And the underworld, not universally, but commonly in tradition, tends to be more of an inner space that you enter, to get there. I believe that working so I believe doing a path working or doing a guided visualization, where you encounter Zeus, is still going to help you approach Zeus. Like, it's still Zeus. It's sort of so like Jason Miller uses the term like throne. There's different vocabulary to it, but
Mhm.
essentially, those sort of inner images, inner egregores that we fill with power, are empowered because they link to something out there, in my opinion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I want your opinion. You don't need to qualify it. It's your opinion, right? So what is this your ritual working space here that we're sitting in right now with you?
Partially, this is one of them. The whole, the whole house,
That's
upstairs and downstairs, is essentially different ritual areas. I live with three other author witches, so there's a lot of magic going on in this house.
Sounds like it.
Yeah,
So, yeah, are they? Is it a secret who you live with, or
no,
can you say?
no. So I live with Devin Hunter, Storm Fairy Wolf, and Chaz Bogan, who all Llewellyn authors, but
So you live in like the Llewellyn house.
yeah, essentially. It makes me think of, because I know like Scott Cunningham and Donald Michael Craig were roommates for a while. And I'm like, this is the modern version.
So what is your, I mean, in your book, you've got a number of spells, which is interesting at the end, simple magical workings that you can do. Does that represent your ritual life in a lot of ways, or are there other things that you do magically?
Oh, I mean, it represents a very small part of it. That magic is very influenced by Christopher Penczak. Obviously, it's very inspired by instant magic and that sort of a thing, but it's more of my take on it. So those are the sort of things that I do throughout my daily life. Like if I'm out and about, which doesn't happen during the last year with COVID, that's the sort of magic that I do on the spot. But I do traditional magical practices that are more ritualistic, that involve tools and involve candles and herbs and all of those things as well. So there's a whole element to the book that isn't there, essentially because the book is sort of like step one
Sure.
in a
Well,
series that I'm doing.
it's nice because it offers a simple sort of container for things rather than being just everything all thrown into one. This book, my book of magic power, is much more of a everything thrown all in together. So, but anyway, what when you say traditional, that means a number of different things to a number of different people. What kind of rituals are you doing?
Okay. So when I use the word traditional, I'm not necessarily saying like British traditional Wicca or anything like that, but I mean more like what you would think, like, the, well, kind of what I kind of lightly start touching breadcrumbs on in my book, of like circle casting
Mhm.
and, calling in the quarters and all of that. I observe esbats, I observe sabbats, just like any witch. But how I approach magic is going to vary based on honestly what I feel like, so if I want to go with a more of a Wiccan type, Wiccan-esque thing, I'll do the circle casting and all of that. If I'm trying to do something a little bit more connected to nature, or something that is a little bit more open to any spirits that happen to be coming by, I'll lay the compass, which is a little bit more like trad crafty.
Mhm.
Right now I'm doing Jack Grail's course, which is very PGM focused. So I'm working with those sort of techniques. I was I've kind of shifted with Jack's thing, but like for a while I was doing a lot of the kind of foundational thelemic work, like the Ruby Star and all of that stuff for a
Mhm.
while. So honestly, like I just love magic. So it just sort of depends on like where my passion is at the moment. I do believe that you can approach your desire regardless of um, which way you're going about it, as long as there's still sort of solid technology behind it.
Do you observe monthly rituals with your roommates, or do you guys all do your own thing?
So yes and no. Devin and I are in the priesthood of Sacred Fires.
Mhm.
So we do a lot of we do a lot of work on our own. And right now, with everything going on, we're doing a lot of Zoom
Sure.
rituals, which has been a very interesting experience. And then there's a lot of times that we'll come together to do magic. Outside, there's because they own a shop, the Mystic Dream, and one of those is a candle burning service. So, we have a whole big thing outside where we just leave candles burning, 24/7, because it's like a safe container. There are things that we do based on certain needs that will come together.
Mhm.
But I mean, for the most part, we're just like four different witches living in the same household, and just like you can imagine with witches, sometimes we come together, but a lot of times we're kind of doing our own thing.
I imagined that was the way it was, but I just wanted to check in.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about scrying and psychic abilities in general, because that is the subject of your book. One thing that I thought was interesting is that you mentioned that the olfactory psychic sense, but I think you call clairalience. Is that what? That's one of the rarer ones. But what's interesting is in these interviews, I've actually had the majority of people say that that's one of their main ones that they experience, that they have all of these olfactory experiences as their magic. So I thought I'd just share that with you. I don't know if that's common to everybody or if that's just people who write books about magic.
that
But
seems pretty rare to me. So
I mean, it's not something that I've encountered in my sort of student populace, but it's something that I've encountered again and again with a lot of the author witches and occultists. But so what would you say your primary psychic sense is?
So I try to look at each of the psychic senses as an internal and external thing. So my external clairvoyance, I feel is naturally strong, and my external clairtangency. So like I've always been, I'm thinking of Adventure Time now, because in Adventure Time, there's the Ice King, and he has wizard eyes, so he's seeing crazy all the time. But like for me, like I tend to see auras a lot easier than other people. I tend to see spirits a lot easier than some people do. But my internal clairvoyance is something I've had to work so strongly at for some reason. I can usually, I don't know if it's like my background in healing energy, but like I can usually like externally feel energy. In fact, when I was doing mediumship training with Danielle Dion, just kind of informal, she recently had a book that Christopher did the forward to. It's amazing, check it out. You know, I just couldn't tap in. And so she was like, here, hold this. And I didn't know what it was. And then all of a sudden everything came out, you know, so that touch, that external clairtangency is something that's very naturally strong for me as well.
Would you say that you're an extrovert in general or an introvert?
It's actually funny. I'm actually very introverted. I just pretend to be very extroverted because I have to if I'm going to reach and engage and teach people.
I was just curious, since your psychic tendencies are external. I was wondering if that was a sign of being an introvert or an extrovert. I've asked nobody else that question. Interesting.
No, but it is funny because a lot of the things that come more naturally to me tend to be external as opposed to internal.
So when you're experiencing an aura, what is that experience like for you? Describe it for people who don't have that experience.
It depends. So I have always seen that sort of etheric layer. What I call the etheric layer is that sort of haze around things. And I can see it stronger to different degrees. If I just kind of like just relax myself and get into sort of a receptive state and just start staring at someone. And usually it only works with like people or living things. Like I can get a little bit off of inanimate objects, but it's more of like people. That haze starts sort of expanding more and more and starts filling with color. Sometimes I see splotches in them. Sometimes I see, I've seen what look like crabs, for lack of a better word, which is usually when we're like, okay, let's cleanse this because something you pick something up. But for me, it's sort of like, the best I can explain it is it's sort of like sunspots in reverse. So when you look at a light source and you look away and you see that sort of like glowy image, it's like that, but if you inverted it. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, it's trying to explain things that I don't feel like I have the vocabulary for.
So when you're experiencing aura, you mentioned that you see crabs or blotches in it. Do you feel that there's a communication going on there that's clear every time, or do you often find yourself going, I don't really know why I'm seeing this happening here?
Yeah, so I don't believe that it is necessarily something that is objective. Although we're touching objective things, everything's still going to be processed through the mind, through how we perceive things and our symbol sets.
Hmm.
So I usually almost never, I don't want that to sound cocky. I almost usually never have trouble, seeing someone's aura, and just kind of peering into it. But that doesn't mean that the colors I'm seeing and the things that I'm seeing are the way that they might look on energetic levels, if that makes sense. It's
Sure.
more of how I'm processing it through my symbol set and through, my subconscious.
But you experience that primarily as a visual sense, or is there a
As
physical sense to it as well, or a tangency is to it as well?
So with that, there's usually not a clairtangency. I mean, if I'm doing healing work or work on like my own aura or someone else's aura, like, I can feel it and I can see where it is and, try to manipulate it a little bit. But for the most part, it tends to be more of a visual thing for me.
Interesting. And so when you are encountering spirits, how does that come to you?
It depends. I've had it come many, many different ways. So sometimes it's that kind of peripheral vision of like shadowy thing just moved, right? Sometimes it's like sparks and orbs that would seem sort of like something that like I would dismiss early on, as just like, oh, something's going on with my eyes, and I've had my eyes checked a billion times and like all that's wrong with them is, I have an astigmatism, which doesn't cause these sort of things. But I have found over the development of my psychic abilities and my spiritual practice that, that these are actually things that if I put my attention onto them, then I can interact with them. Um, I've had some experiences with spirits that I don't talk about because they're A, unbelievable, and two, you shouldn't believe it just because I said it happened or I experienced it a certain way. There's certain things that you're just going to sound crazy with. A lot of the more form, like when I experience form, tends to either be out of my body while dreaming or, an internal thing.
So for the most part, you're not experiencing beings in your environment that you then interact with in any kind of meaningful way. It's more just sort of like things that are there that you're sensing or seeing, and it.
Yeah. Yeah, so not so much MySpace, because we got that under lock and key.
Mhm.
But yeah, a lot of it is just sort of more noticing movements and energies that are going on. I have had experiences, and this is where I'm like, oh, I would sound crazy, but I have had experiences with, figure type entities. But when I interact with them directly, I don't necessarily see them as clear as I would, internally, whether that's dreaming or whether that's, astral projection or things of that nature.
And do you have dialogues with these spirits or no?
Sometimes I try to. There's a lot of times that something just won't respond to me.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to try to force something to talk to me. And it depends on where I am. So if it's my space and there's something that's in here and it won't talk to me, I'll usually kind of push it out, politely push it out unless it becomes a problem. But usually if I come across something in other places and they don't want to interact or respond, I respect that. I have a friend who is considered an elder, and they had friends come over to the house that were witches, right? Like visiting and staying. And I guess they sensed the spirit at night and they banished a ghost that was in their house, what they referred to as a ghost. And they were actually very upset about that, you know, because they were like, that was like, we had a good relationship with that spirit, you know, and
We
like,
like
and you
that
just
guy.
like threw it out. So I try to like, you know, be respectful of like, you know, just because, you know, I'm a human and I don't understand something, or something may even come across as scary, of trying to still be respectful and consensual until something feels like it's crossed my boundaries of consent.
Makes sense to me. So you're working on a new book,
I am.
and you're a little bit what can you tell us about this book without revealing so much that you feel like you're breaking the fourth power of the Sphinx?
Yeah. So this book is sort of, to me, the natural next step. You know, and we did touch on a lot of the things in this interview. It's almost like you're psychic. Um, yeah, I mean, I have a lot of contributions from other people that's been involved. And the thing I'm the most excited about is Silver Ravenwolf has agreed to do the forward, which is like my childhood here. Like that's how
Sure.
I first entered real witchcraft, you know, as opposed to just like media and TV. So that is like a huge honor, and I'm just like over the freaking moon about that, because you know I'm still, you know, I try to always remember like what it was like when I started, you know, when I was trying to find information, and who was helpful to me on that path. And I wrote Silver Ravenwolf probably like 8 letters as a child. I don't even know if she got them,
She
because she
hasn't
was,
talked to you about that at all?
you know, she's kind of acknowledged it, but I think it's one of those things. I think she got either so much mail, or Llewellyn just wasn't passing it forward.
Sure.
You know, because she was Silver Ravenwolf in the 90s, you know, and she still is Silver Ravenwolf, but
She still is Silver Ravenwolf.
yeah,
But now you're Mat Auryn.
I am.
You have one of the most successful books on Amazon right now, so that's got to be interesting.
It is interesting. It doesn't quite feel real in a lot of ways. I'm very blessed and very fortunate that it seems to have been received as well as it has so far. Um, but yeah, I mean, it always gets weird when people ask me or mention how great it's doing. You know, obviously I'm very happy about that, you know, but like, I'm just happy that it's reaching people.
Sure, yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I think is really great about this, and I like books like this because it has a lot of things to do in it. So it's not just a bunch of stories or theories. It's, you know, it's like here's some stuff to try out, and it basically a lot of the book is stuff to work with. I think there's 90 or more exercise.
93.
93. Oh,
That's
93.
my little, yeah, Easter egg.
um, so I mean, it's a book that you know, it's not just, you know, a well written nice book. It's a book that actually people can get a lot of stuff out of if they want to go through it. I did notice that there was one person on, I think it was Amazon, who gave a review of it that was less than favorable, and they basically said that it was there was too many exercises, and there was no, like, they didn't know how to go about approaching all the exercises. What's your vision? Like, how many times does a person need to do each exercise before they move on to the next one?
So, I mean, I don't think there's a universal answer for that. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of hard to um, explain to someone. I mean, it's sort of like a personal thing. So, like, I don't know, like, did you have the experience? Do you feel you understood what it is and are ready to move on? You know, it's not like, if we were to liken it to martial arts, it's not like, you know, you do 5 roundhouse kicks, you know, and you're ready to move on. You know, it's about like constantly working at it, like being able to do it properly, but then also maintaining that. So, you know, that's a really difficult question to answer across the board.
Would you say that I mean, are uh, there's two different kinds of exercises in the book, and I think in most books there's a kind of exercise that's like, here's an exercise that I want you to do so that you can get your feet wet, and then you probably won't go back to that again. And then there's other kinds of exercises that are that are more things that you're going to be
Foundational.
using again and again and again. So like, how many times would you imagine that a person, once they've kind of gotten the feeling for some of those more, you know, experiential, just open yourself up kind of exercises, like for like the first exercise is an exercise in imagination, or maybe it's the second one, where you basically just do like a pretend reading on someone, you know, where you just basically go with it and just do whatever comes. How many times should a person do that before they move on?
Until they feel comfortable, like,
Yeah,
because that one is not, like you're saying, it's not a foundational exercise. That is more about giving yourself a permission slip,
right.
you know, and allowing yourself to even be wrong and be silly. So, you know, I mean, if you find it helpful, if you're feeling doubtful about your own practices and your own gifts, I hate the word gifts. I can't believe I used that. But you know, if your own psychic ability, you know, perhaps you do want to revisit that. I think for the most part, the emphasis that I put on, you know, regularly doing and maintaining is the set I refer to as tuning in.
Hmm.
But even that, it's about like getting to a point to where you can develop that psychic prompt, that trigger, so that you can enter it easily. And you know, a lot of it is like when I have workshops or when I'm working with my own, you know, students in my tradition, you know, everyone's at different paces. So, you know, some people can, you know, master something. Not master. They can get something down really well, super fast, and other people struggle with something a little bit longer. You know, if you are not getting you know, the clairvoyance experience, you know, obviously you need to keep working at it until you have it. But I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that, because I don't believe that we are one size fit all.
No, everybody's different, and each of us have things that we're better at than others. You don't like the word gifts, but I guess predilections towards one thing or another, right? So,
Yeah. I usually use the word predisposition.
mhm.
Um, you know, I do think that, you know, everyone is naturally stronger at something. And I usually liken this to traditional teaching. So the idea of, you know, there's different types of learners. There's some people that are auditory, some people that are kinesthetic, you know. So it's all about like figuring out like, well, how do I do this thing? How do I receive this information naturally? And what are the areas I'm weak in that I could possibly strengthen to try to work at a little bit more of a fuller capacity?
How much time do you think people should spend on that as opposed to just sort of building up their strength? You know, I mean, obviously you don't want to be like the muscle guy that just builds up his arms and has skinny little legs. But
Right.
but at the same time, there's a point when, you know, maybe you're not going to be a long distance runner. Maybe you're going to be more of a heavy lifter. You know, like,
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's like a personal decision, you know.
yeah.
Again, that's hard to answer for everyone. You know, some people are going to want to be, you know, those like super veiny, muscly people. You know, some people are going to want to work more on their chest than, you know, their legs. I, you know, I'm very, as you can tell throughout this interview, I'm very big on like you sort of determining those sort of things out for
Mhm.
yourself.
So final thoughts here. Um, you do a significant amount of teaching. It seems like. What would you say to a person who's just getting into magic? Like, what's the first sort of most important thing that you would like to impart to a person like that?
Okay. So I'm a big advocate of reading everything you can possibly get your hands on and understanding that that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be 100% true or you're going to resonate with it. But learning various perspectives is really important. Um, I believe meditation is, if I had one practice that I could like emphasize on people, it is meditation. So, strong focus on meditation, not getting hung up on spiritual materialism. The tools are fun, and effective, but not getting fixated on like hoarding, 20 wands. Like I remember when I was a little kid, like, and I was reading the things I needed to work magic, and I'm like, this is like $1,000 worth of stuff, you know. So I think like focusing on those inner things, which is why I wrote the book that I did, and just not really comparing yourself to others, and kind of just trying to better your own practice for yourself.